For instance, I gave them a name of a former board member who I know contributed yearly to the organization, and asked them to use that as a test case to find out. Obviously, she would have been a continual donor to the organization, and it took them about 3 weeks to come up with the information that I needed. And I basically was told that their system couldn't accommodate providing that kind of information.
Do you have any other questions?
No, I don't. Would you like a business card?
Please. Thank you. Any other creditors? Mr. Livesey?
Okay. My name is Rory Livesey. I'm going to be the trustee's attorney in this case, and I do have a few questions for you.
Okay.
You say you started in 2012?
Yes, January 9th, 2012.
Okay. Now, was the first sign of any trouble at, that was called your BSCF? Yeah. Was the first sign the consent decree that came through in March of 2013?
No, actually, when I was interviewed, it was a blind ad, and I had difficulty even getting anyone to tell me who they were. I wasn't provided a job description or anything like that. So a couple of days prior to the scheduled interview time, I had decided I wasn't going to go, and got a telephone call from one of the board members, so I ended up going to the interview. To their credit, those two people who interviewed me did tell me that there had been a complaint lodged with the Attorney General's office by a Mr. Who. And I asked, it seemed odd to me at that point, and I asked a lot of questions, and apparently it didn't occur to any of them to call the Attorney General's office to check. And in retrospect, it should have occurred to me. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So they did tell me that there was an investigation that occurred at the end of the previous year. I asked for copious amounts of financial information, which they provided. It was all completed by Clark Newber, which is a well-known accounting firm, and they basically gave them a clean bill of health. So I didn't know that apparently the Attorney General's office had been investigating prior to this complaint. And probably 3 weeks into the job, it became apparent to me that I would need the assistance of a bookkeeper and other things to try to straighten it out, because it was quite a mess. So I hired a bookkeeper. I looked at records. The board asked me to find office space, and so I began 3 weeks into the job trying to disconnect the nonprofit from legacy. But unbeknownst to me, this investigation had already begun going on, and so no matter what I would have done, it seems to me, it wouldn't work because it just was too intertwined.
And it was the relationship with legacy that you figured was the problem?
The man who owned the fundraising company was serving as the president of the board for the nonprofit.
Okay. Is he the one who actually hired you?
The two board members actually hired me.
What were their names?
Joyce Bottenberg and Jim Sheehan.
Okay. Well, I guess what was your title?
I was hired as a part-time executive director.
Okay. And in addition to an executive director, there's also a president?
I show up as a variety of things, and again, unbeknownst to me. I guess the biggest problem I had was the fact that the person who ran Legacy had an office next door to the person who ran his company. And so they just had a habit of, going back and forth with each other. And so when something occurred or something was signed, I very often was the last person to receive a copy, or even a courtesy phone call that something.
Okay. Who ran Legacy?
A man by the name of Jeff Cunningham.
Okay. And who was he also the one who was the president of the debtor?
The president
of, I remember this eventually, BCPF?
No.
Okay. Who was the president of BCPF?
Well, that would have been one of the board members. Now,
Okay.
when I came into the situation, there were only 4 left from what I call the old guard. And they were mostly longtime friends of Jim Patton's that met quarterly with him, and I believe that Joyce Bottenberg agreed to be the secretary or treasurer, which was required by state agencies as a nonprofit is set up. But as soon as I was hired, very quickly, and 2 of those board members I never saw. They never came to meetings. And so I think by May of that year, or possibly June, all of those people were gone. And so it was left to me to try to recruit new board members. And I tried to be honest that, and by that time the IRS had come calling, so that was the second. So as you can imagine, it was difficult to find anyone who wanted to step into this. Did I answer your question?
Well, I guess maybe you did. You mentioned that the president of the debtor, that's Proof of Falls Bankruptcy. Okay, the debtor was also an officer at Legacy.
Jim Patton owns Legacy Incorporated.
Right. And
whether or not he owns it with other people, I don't know. And I don't know that he had, when I went back and read all the prior minutes and whatnot, he was listed everything from a volunteer to president of the nonprofit. I mean, a variety of things.
Okay, but now during your stewardship, was there ever somebody titled president working at the company?
I never had board members long enough to have officers. The bylaws stated that I could have had as few as 3 and as many as 10, and so I had three individuals who sort of stuck through with me till the bitter end.
Do you know, is there a copy of the consent decree in the paperwork that's going to be turned over to the trustee?
Yes.
You mentioned that the contract with Legacy is an 80-20 split, with 80% going to Legacy and 20% going to the debtor. But did I hear you earlier testify that there was also money paid to Amber is she an employee of Legacy?
When I began the position, she was employed by the nonprofit, but she was physically working at the Legacy office, in an office just outside the 2 people who are named in all of this. But I received the
I'm
nonprofit.
Sorry, back. When you say the 2 people named, are you referring to Mr. Patton and Mr. Cunningham?
That's correct.
Okay.
We paid for everything. We paid for, well, I provided copies of the invoices that I got every month, and that lists out what specifically by amount was paid.
Okay, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if I understand what you're saying, the money was split 80-20 with Legacy getting 80%, and out of your 20, you also had to pay overhead.
That would be correct. And the 2 board members who hired me, I believe, were the 2 individuals who signed that contract. And when I looked at it, it was a 10-year contract that they signed.
Have you had experience in these sort of businesses or these sort of enterprises before?
Not with a professional fundraiser, no.
Okay, so
I have long nonprofit experience, but it's writing grants and community foundations and individual asks and that kind of thing. This is my first experience with a fundraiser like this.
So you wouldn't necessarily know that this contract was an industry standard?
No, but I pointed out to anyone who would listen, including the bookkeeper, that there's something very wrong with this. But it had been signed. It was for 10 years. I looked through it repeatedly, and there wasn't even an out clause. Somewhere buried deep in the back 14th page was a little comment that when the contract expired, you had like 7 days or something to say something, or it would be automatically renewed for another 10 years.
Do you recall who signed that contract on behalf of the nonprofit?
I believe it was Joyce Bottenberg and Jim Sheehan, the 2 people who interviewed me. One of those people had long nonprofit experience. She worked with the Red Cross for years, so I found it curious. And when I brought it up, the standard comment from anyone associated with this was, you know, these people were completely honest. There was nothing to worry about. There was nothing to find in the investigation and all of that kind of thing. So my questions and concerns sort of fell on deaf ears for the most part.
Okay. And you mentioned that did you mention you were the only signer on the holding account?
I was the only one who could authorize money to be transferred someplace else. That's the only association I had with that account, is just once a month.
Okay, when you say transfer someplace else, where else would where would it go?
Our share would come to us, and the legacy share would go to them.
Okay, and and you said you had the okay, or you had to okay the transfer. Did you ever not okay a transfer?
I did after the consent decree came, where reading through it, I was instructed to cease doing business with them. So that seemed to me part of doing business with them.
During your tenure, did you ever ask Legacy for a breakdown of, I guess, its expenses, or there was I'll start with that. Any breakdown of what they put into this?
There were repeated requests, not only by me but from the bookkeeper, trying to. She got the financial records in some sort of strange, not generally accepted accounting system, and so it took us probably 5 months to get it all figured out, get it all transferred into QuickBooks, so that, you know, whoever's left behind could figure it out. But every request, including requests from the IRS for a lot of information, was never forthcoming.
Ever an inclination that Legacy was keeping more than its 80%?
Well, my personal,
Yeah.
yes. And actually, I think that was the crux of the complaint from Mr. who got a call from one of these telemarketers, and the person could not answer his questions, and it raised concerns with him, and he started, you know, poking around, and so the owner of the company is building a, you know, $7 million house on Lopez Island, so I guess that would.
Okay, thank you. I have no more questions.
Okay.
Any other creditors? Thank you. Excuse.
Thank you.